let's get started then. Okay, so we have 3 objectives today in a very short space of 45 minutes. We want to be able to describe key leadership skills and their importance in your personal and professional context. We also want to determine the context in which you can apply leadership skills today. And number 3, it would also be important to identify barriers to influencing others as a leader and ways of overcoming them. So that's the aim for today. If you could make sure that your microphone is turned off when you don't speak, just so we don't have any intrusive noise, I would appreciate it. I think it's maybe we forget at times. So besides these 3 key elements, these 3 key objectives, any others that you'd like to learn today? Anything that sort of is on your mind that piques your curiosity about leadership?
Maybe how we can develop these skills, no?
Right, exactly. So so if we have them or we're trying to get them, how can we develop them? Great, thank you so much. Good. So let's start with a quick quote. This is from Ken Blanchard, who's a prominent author in management. You might have seen some books by him. So what he says is that the key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is it a mix?
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree with that.
Yes, I agree.
I agree.
Okay. So then let me ask you, thinking of leaders today, people you can identify as leaders in politics, in maybe the company or institution you work or study in, how many of them use authority as a tool? What percentage use authority as a tool? And how many use influence as a tool for exerting leadership? What do you think? If you can think percentages of our political leaders or any other leaders in society, what percentage use authority to exert leadership and what percentage use influence?
I think they use both because it depends in the role they have.
Okay, yeah. And I think maybe you sort of come to learn how to use one once you've used the other, right?
Exactly.
So it might be that something propelled you to having a position of authority. And then in the process, you've learned how to influence your way even more upwards, yeah? Gina says 80% influence and 20% authority. That's great. That's great. I don't know if it's the same world I'm looking at, but it's a great start. It's definitely an ideal. Okay. So as I mentioned in the chat, you have the file of the presentation. And so for the next activity, you'll have to refer to it. On page 4, just after this leadership quote, there are 4 questions. So I'm going to read the questions now, and then I'll let you work together. So the questions are, can you recognize a leader on the spot? Right? When you see them the first time, how? How do you know they're a leader? This is on page 4. 2, can it be that you are or were a leader in an everyday situation? If yes, if you felt you were a leader in a very specific situation at some point, or you are today, if you wouldn't mind telling us about it. 3, what key skills do you think leaders have? And then here we depend on sort of your experience and your understanding of leadership. And number 4, how is leadership expressed or exerted? So yeah, we know what leadership is, we can define it, we can do percentages, we can recognize examples, but what's this sort of magic energy that we call leadership and then has an influence on others? I'm being asked to share the link again, and I can do that in just a second. There you go. The short link has been shared. So if you could please find page 4 while I prepare to move you into little groups. Thank you. I think we're all back now. I heard some interesting snippets of conversations as I walked in. And so one of the ones that attracted my attention was that a leader or a developing leader is a leader that acquires emotional intelligence skills, and that's maybe something we can discuss as the presentation continues. Right, so thank you for taking the time to discuss that. Moving on. Okay, so that made me think of the next slide I had prepared, which is on positive influencing skills for leaders, right? So this is what I'd say a key component, a key element, key trait of a leader is a leader who knows, who has developed positive influencing skills, right? So you have a definition at the bottom, right? So positive influencing skills are those skills that are non-manipulative, persuading behavior, right? They enable you to achieve more with other people in such a way that they feel good about the interaction with you, right? So I think you agree. But if you are to sort of identify how you can actually obtain these skills or develop them, you have those two circles. So obviously they overlap, and that's positive influencing skills. So this has to do on one hand with having relationship skills, right? We're humans. I think being social is something that is part of our nature and something that sort of gets fine-tuned and developed through life. And then, so we have that. I think most of us have relationship skills. We can, again, try them out, use them in our families, with friends, and then later in life in school and in work contexts. And then the other set of skills in the other circle, which are the persuasion and selling skills, are the ones that were not essentially being taught in school or in our families. I don't think we have necessarily structured, overt, in plain sight experiences that teach us how to persuade and how to sell, how to convince someone, how to sell them something. So this is very important and is one key element of being a leader. I also wanted to share with you this pyramid. So this pyramid illustrates reactions other people have generally when we, because of a given situation or simply because of the assigned role in life or something we've built, try to be a leader, when we try to influence others. So obviously from the bottom to the top, we go from resistance to commitment. Okay, so there are times when we try with different strategies to convince someone of something as a leader, and then the reaction is, well, I won't do it. Why should I? I would also tell others not to. And then these people react aggressively or passive aggressively to our our influencing behavior. So then they may obstruct or sabotage what we're trying to do. They might look for excuses not to follow instructions, or if they're really clever, they might pretend to comply. And then we might have the illusion that we are true leaders when in fact people are just essentially telling us they're going to do something and they're not doing it. Moving up the pyramids, and this is again in the area of what authority means, it might be the reaction to our leadership skills is compliance. So people might think, right, so this is my authority, this is my leader, so I have to do whatever they tell me. I can do it, and I'll do it under these circumstances, right? There might not be a change in attitude. They might still hate their work or hate the environment or the context, but they will do it. If you were to take them to a psychoanalyst, they might tell the psychoanalyst they actually feel compelled or forced to do what they want to do. They don't do it because of some intrinsic motivation. And then if we were to measure their engagement and creativity, we would find out they are limited. So these two reactions, resistance and compliance, typically happen when the leaders that we're studying are the ones who exert authority and not so much influence. So if you're trying to identify whether a leader uses a certain percentage of authority and the rest is positive influence, just look at the people that follow them. Are they compliant people? Are they resistant people? Or are they something else? Are they committed people? People who say, I will do it. I can lead others to do it. I get what I value in return for doing this, right? Something important to me. Where even with little monitoring, little supervision, we have a sustained effort for these people to achieve something over time because they are influenced. When goals are shared and objectives, right? There's trust, there's credibility. And essentially it goes back to what you said, and emotional intelligence. This builds better relationships. So again, look at the people who follow to identify what kind of leader they have. You take your pick, choose a political leader today, look at their party, look at the people who follow them, and I think you will decide whether they are a positive influencer or just someone who was given authority. Right. I said that I also wanted to discuss briefly some of the barriers to you becoming a leader who can influence, right? So we are leaders in different situations. You can be a leader in any circumstance where there's a vacuum of power, right? And you have to step in and you have to convince others to do or not to do something. So here, just to sort of make it clear that we have internal barriers, right? Such as negative self-image. I can't do it. I'm unable to do it. I've never learned. My parents never educated me. I haven't been to a place where I had to study or get work experience that also convinced me to be a leader, right? You might not be motivated. It's too much work. You might not be aware that you have skills to be a leader because no one's told you and you haven't been able to experience the fruits of leadership. You might not have power. You might think that others will not follow you. You might think that others are more powerful, and so on. Fear of rejection, past experiences. And then we also have work pressure and commitments, as external barriers, right? So you might want to be a leader in a given area of your life or at work, but you just don't have the time because you have to answer all those emails, because you have to go to class, because you have to do a certain task. It might be that you work for a company where the structure is flat or very rigid, so there's simply not a place for you to exert authority through leadership. It might be that other people expect you to just follow, you might not have the resources, and so on. So I think you can recognize this right away. And we don't have that much time for discussion to discuss this, and also I don't want you to get too negative about it. So we'll move on to the next slide. Right, so you might have seen this before. It's a nice, simple acronym, BRAIN, B-R-A-I-N, that sort of talks about the influencing styles of a leader, right? So starting with the B is for bridging from bridge, right? What unites two different separate points. So bridging is about influencing through relationships and through leveraging or utilizing reciprocity, right? Meeting people halfway. This is a key component in leadership. R stands for rationalizing, right, or justifying. So in this case, you influence by having the right data, having the right facts, having the evidence, being very authoritative would be the word. Moving on to A, this is about being confident, about asking questions and challenging others' view, right, being assertive. So assertive in English has maybe a meaning that I think in Spanish is maybe a bit lost. So this is what assertiveness is, being confident, right? Building that confidence and being able to communicate in a way that persuades. I stands for inspiring, right? So this is about influencing by sharing stories and creating a shared sense of purpose, right? A true leader is inspiring. And again, if you think of examples of leaders that you recognize, you will see that they have a narrative, they have a story to tell, right? They might be the oppressed person who succeeded and now is finally a leader. It might be the person who achieved some kind of truth or result. And so they are inspiring to us that way. And N stands for negotiating, right? It's not about manipulating. It's not about forcing. It's about being a person who can influence by seeking concessions, by making concessions and making compromises, right? Making exchanges. So maybe this is an acronym you can remember, and you'll have it in the slides, so you can actually tell someone about it. BRAIAIN. So bridging, rationalizing, asserting, inspiring, and negotiating. Right, moving on. For the last section of the sort of this part of the workshop, I wanted to draw your attention to behaviors that leaders have. So leaders can have two types of behaviors. They can be pushing, they can have pushing behaviors or pulling behaviors, right? So do you have a definition there? Forcing someone to agree with you through reasoning, threats, right? Threats or rewards. Or pulling, you can motivate someone by allowing them to see possibilities, potential, by allowing them to see a different point of view, a different angle, so they can change their position. So again, push is about forcing and pull is about motivating. So I have a few examples for you. Let's see if you can help me identify if these are push or pull behaviors. First one, I believe that my staff or my team should do what I want them to do. After all, I am the boss. Is this a push or a pull behavior?
A push?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right. But is that to say that we don't believe that? Well, we do. If I have a team, it is my expectation they should do what I want them to do. But it's not something that works as an argument, right? I try to get on the same wavelength as the people I work with. Is this a pull or a push behavior?
Pull.
Pull, yeah. So wavelength is a synonym for frequency, right? It's definitely a pull behavior. Excellent. Some people are just plain obstinate. Do we know what obstinate means? What's a synonym in English?
You don't change your mind. You are
Yeah. Stubborn, right? Stubborn, obstinate, stubborn. Even when I present them with all the facts, it's in their character. Is this a push or pull thinking or behavior?
Push.
Push, right. Yes. I encourage people to ask me questions so that they can think through my arguments for themselves.
Yes.
Pull.
Yeah, ideally, right? Yeah, so you can be a skilled question maker, and then they can figure out the answer to an argument. It might sound like a bit of manipulation, but it's not. It's just a way of assertively convincing someone to think. Definitely a pull behavior. If you let others talk too much, you might lose control. Push or pull?
Push.
Yeah, it's about the sphere that I think some of you mentioned, right? You cannot be afraid of taking risks. Let them take control if needed, and that would be a pull behavior if you let others take control. When I have the facts, I like to move swiftly or rapidly through them so that I can tell others my point of view. Push or pull?
Push.
Push, right? Exactly. So if you move too rapidly through the facts, then people are just going to ignore them. They're just going to essentially think that you maybe are boasting, that you're too arrogant, or you're trying to inundate them with facts so they can actually brainwash you. So it's definitely a push behavior. I like to pace my arguments, right, to give them a certain rhythm so that I can listen to the other person's point of view. This is an obvious pull. Yeah, exactly. It is important to get others to imagine what my proposals will mean for them.
Pull.
Yeah, it's that angle or point of view we mentioned that you have to convince people to see. And the last one, giving people the facts enables them to be more involved in decision making.
Pull.
Yes, exactly. Right. So there you go. You have some tips to what are pull behaviors that you can use with others. Next time you're rushing into convincing someone by being forceful or by overwhelming with facts, or maybe not necessarily listening to them, then you can think of these tips, and then you can go ahead and use pull behaviors or convert them to pull behaviors. Right. One last quote before our guest speaker arrives. So this is from Joe Maxwell, self-appointed but recognized leadership guru. True leadership cannot be awarded, appointed, or assigned. It comes only from influence, and that cannot be mandated. It must be earned. Yeah? So, of course, it sounds very good, right? So that's the key sort of point for you, because you said, all right, well, we also want to learn how to be a leader. Right. So you learn to be a leader if you don't have leadership skills by learning how to influence, right, instead of manipulate or force. So there you go. That's one key. That's one key thing. And luckily, we have a wealth of material, lots of books on how to influence others. And more importantly, we have all these experiences on a daily basis where we can tell whether we influence someone or we, I don't know, force them to do something. And then we can just sit down maybe and think and learn from these experiences. So at the very end of the PowerPoint presentation, there is like a glossary, like an A to Z of influencing across, right? So I think we'll have some time at the end of the workshop after our guest speaker to discuss sort of, developing these sort of key points into maybe 3 or more pieces of advice that you would give to someone who is aiming to become or, become a better leader. So let me just, I'm going to stop the presentation right now. Let me see if our guest speaker is here. And there he is. So I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Grundy. He's our teaching center manager for the Mexico center.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening.
Good.
Good
Ellie.
evening.
Yeah. I was just listening to Lucian's interesting thing around pushing and pulling. I think I need to get that session myself. There were some quite useful things in there from what I could see. So I think I've just got, correct me if I'm wrong, Lucian, there's like kind of a 5-minute slot just to a few thoughts of mine on leadership. Is that right?
Yeah, just maybe some tips or something that you think would be important for us to know on leadership. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a very interesting area. I did a bit of study on it when I was doing my MBA. I did really like the idea of the theory behind leadership, and there's lots of useful resources and theories out there. I'm just gonna, if it's all right with everybody, I'll just quickly talk through the kind of areas I found most interesting, and then maybe they're the kind of things we can talk about in future sessions. So one of the things I particularly liked was the area around leadership styles. So kind of recognizing the type of leader you are, but also recognizing the fact that it can be useful, and very successful leaders tend to move between different styles. So at one stage, with one person or in one context, they may be very kind of pace setting and dynamic and kind of pushing people forward. Whereas in another context, that's just not right. So they become much more of a coaching leader, or more kind of empathetic with staff. So I think having that knowledge of the type of leader you normally are and where you feel most comfortable, but also recognizing that in different situations, different contexts, you maybe need to try a different approach or a different style where suitable, which I think is a challenge, and it's something that I try personally to work on. Another thing I liked was the idea of the kind of the organizational life cycle. So, you know, organizations and projects and businesses tend to kind of grow very rapidly from creation, and then they become more mature, and then they either improve again, or they kind of take a downturn and then and decline. And I think I've very much in my career, I've kind of found that I'm quite suited to certain stages of that life cycle. And I know that there are other managers I've worked under who are maybe better than I am in certain other aspects. So maybe there's, you know, for example, one of my previous managers, I think, is quite good when it comes to turnaround and managing those really difficult decisions that need to be made. Whereas I've always felt much more confident when it's kind of taking an idea and trying to grow it. In my last job, I was opening up a new centre for the British Council and trying to grow it towards maturity. But then I became aware, once it started to mature, that maybe, you know, someone else could come in with different skills and then take it on. I found that to be quite useful, and that's an interesting area of study as well. The other point I would kind of touch on is the idea around communication skills. We did a lot of, when I was studying it, and I've become very aware of it, is the kind of different sort of circles of attention. So I personally feel much more confident when I'm speaking to someone one-to-one, or if I'm speaking to a large group, because I previously was a teacher, than I do when I'm speaking to maybe a group of 4 or 5. I find that kind of middle public conversation to be more challenging for me. So I know that I become quite aware if I've got a difficult conversation, or if I've got a conversation where I maybe don't feel as confident. I would rather it be more intimate or be more of a broadcast session. I find that to be my personal kind of comfort zone. So I try and sometimes engineer conversations around that way. I like to ask for phone calls and conversations and chats, as opposed to kind of sort of meetings with sort of 5 or 6 people where possible. I guess the final thing I kind of liked was the idea around the kind of sense of urgency. So when you're leading a team, you know, you need to kind of go through that. It's almost like change management. So you kind of begin with that idea of, all right, getting your team, getting people on board, sharing your ideas. But the thing I always try and look for is that early kind of victory and that quick win, so that you kind of show people, right, this is working, this has gone well, and then you really try and exploit that and build on it. I found that to be quite useful where possible. I think it does depend on who you are and how you manage. I tend to find one of my weaknesses is I like to get involved in everything, and it tends to be something my manager tells me to sort of step away from things and let people manage them, and me be more of an overview kind of role. But I like to be, where possible, involved in everything, which is something I need to get better at. But at the same time, it does help me to kind of generate that sense of progress early on when I'm trying to lead the team. And I guess the final couple of things I've had is kind of, I think one thing I was told by the head of kind of teaching globally was I tend to have a kind of focus on things which have not gone well, whereas his recommendation to me was to be a bit more positive, you know, finish the day, think about, right, what was a success today, what went well, what went better than expected, as opposed to kind of stewing on the difficult conversation or the thing you didn't do quite as well as you would like at the end of the day. That's another thing I'm trying to get in my mindset, to kind of focus on the positives, and also, you know, focus on the positives with members of your team. So people kind of worry about lots of things, but make them aware of the things that have gone well and make sure that's recognized in terms of their participation and what they've done to achieve that. There you go. That's a kind of 5-minute flash on leadership.
No, that was actually a lot. I feel we should have a separate workshop. Some very good things. This last thing that you mentioned about sort of maybe focusing a bit more in terms of sort of your mental energy on negative things would be one of the internal barriers that we discussed at the beginning of the workshop, right? That might prevent you from being an effective leader, or a leader who is maybe, well, at least in some people's eyes, effective. So thank you so much, Stephen. We've got about 8 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor to discussion. I'm sure you have some questions for myself or Stephen.
Could you share?
Types? Yes.
Could you share one of the biggest challenges that you had to face while dealing or heading this group in another country that means implies another culture and different styles maybe of leadership?
Do you want me to go, Lucian, or do you want to go?
I mean, just briefly, I think the culture here in Mexico would be described as a high context culture, right? Where maybe things are not as direct. Perhaps there's a lot of sort of, you know, shaded meaning, nuanced meaning to stuff. And I think, you know, I've had this experience here in Mexico for the past 10 years. And then I've lived in countries where context is very low, where things are very direct and very clear. And I think in terms of leadership, then it goes back to what you said and what you contributed in terms of, you know, being able to listen, developing these sort of, you know, emotional intelligence skills. I definitely think that you need a higher level of emotional intelligence skill in a culture like the Mexican culture, for example. So that would be my input here.
Yeah, if I could maybe, I think that's, yeah, exactly the same. I think British Council is an interesting case because we have a kind of a split between sort of British people, Mexican people, foreign people, and it's a bit of a mix of cultures and leadership styles and management styles, and you have to be very, you know, very sensitive to the culture you're working in, and be aware of the way things are done and the way things are perceived, and just make sure that's part of your thinking when you're managing teams from different backgrounds and different cultures.
Thank you. Someone is asking, what are the types of leadership? So, I mean, where can we start? So many types, right? So I think one that springs to mind is transactional leadership, which is more about exchanges, sort of building a relationship where you are able to give something and make concessions, and then in return you obtain concessions. That'll be transactional leadership. There's one that I like as well that's called laissez-faire leadership. I'm gonna spell it in the chat. It's an expression that comes from French. And it's about sort of being relaxed, letting things happen, going with the flow. So that would be a type of leadership where you let people develop and you let people sort of understand you and understand the situation so they can actually do something, but you are the leader. It's in the chat. So that would be two types that I'd like to mention, transactional and laissez-faire.
Yeah, there's a useful, there's a kind of paper from someone called Goldman et al. It's from the Harvard Business Review. It is about 20 years out of date now, but it was still very relevant when I read it, and it talked a lot about different leadership styles and the impact they have. So I'll reference that in the chat.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And regarding some of the strategies to motivate the team in order to, well, as you mentioned in the presentation, Alexander, to motivate the team in order to achieve a goal. Could you share one strategy or two strategies to do it, considering our context, cultural context, your experience?
All right, I think it's a fairly complex question, putting me on the spot a little bit, but I'd like to refer back to the push and pull behaviors, right? So I think, I mean, I would say that probably because this culture we're in right now is sort of hiring context is less direct. I'd say that you have to make even a more of an investment in pull behaviors, right? In pull behaviors as a leader. But I think maybe some of the other participants can help us with an answer. So how does leadership work in this culture? What do you think? Maybe this goes. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
No, what do you mean? I couldn't. Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, the question was around sort of how does leadership change, or what's different about leadership in a culture like the culture we live in, like Mexico's culture, and that's why I said I think you require more of an investment in pull behaviors here, and that was the question for you. What makes a good leader? What's a tip for a leader who's just arrived in Mexico and well wants to continue being a leader? What would you say to them?
Well, I don't pretend to answer myself, but reading the A to Z dictionary that you share, I think that doing favors is one of the kind of or styles that you already mentioned. How did you relate to others? So in that sense, you create like a gift, a social gift. So probably in another moment that you need something, is more possible or more probable that you are going to get that favor back. So yeah, it's not like you are waiting always to get that kind of favors, but yeah, I think that it helps to improve the relationships, in your job or other places.
Thank you. I mean, that was a very good contribution, Cynthia. Absolutely, I agree. Goes back to sort of maybe making these concessions. Maybe it would be important for a leader in Mexico to make more concessions. Because that builds sort of the bridge we discussed, and also it's about generating commitment amongst like a team, let's say. But I think what you're saying also goes back to sort of influencing skills, where we discussed this concept of this emotional bank account, where every time you give something or do something, you essentially make a deposit. And then it's important for you to verbalize that, no worries. I think you'll do the same. I think you would do the same for me next time, or whatever it is. And then so you build this emotional bank account with these deposits, and then when the time comes, you can actually make a withdrawal. You can actually take something out. I think that's what I sort of understood from what you said, and that's a well-defined concept in influencing skills. All right. Well, thank you so much for your participation. I appreciate it. It's 7 o'clock, so it's the end of our workshop. I'm going to share the link one more time on the chat for the to the PDF for the PowerPoint, and then that way those of you who arrived a bit later can have it. No, that's not it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good night. Stay out of the rain.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for today's workshop.
Thank you
nice
so much.
Thank you so much for
attend.
coming. It was nice to
Was
meet you.
amazing, teacher. Thank you very much.
Bye.